All right, let's dig into a situation that is super common and honestly pretty stressful. You go to a clinic, they treat you for one thing, but then a follow-up report says it was something else entirely. So what happens to your medical bill, and why do doctors even disagree in the first place? We're going to break it all down. So let's jump right in with a classic example. Picture this. You go to an urgent care with an injury. The clinician on duty takes an x-ray, looks at it, and says, yep, looks like a fracture. So they fit you with a big walking boot and send you on your way. But then, a day or two later, you get a notification from your patient portal. It's the final report from the specialist, the radiologist, and it says, no fracture. And right away, you're thinking, wait, am I going to be on the hook for this really expensive boot? This experience is incredibly common. Your whole journey into this confusing world of medical billing really kicks off the second you walk out that clinic door, thinking you've got a clear answer and a plan. So you're at home, you're following the doctor's orders, and then bam, that little notification pops up on your phone. It's confusing, it's a little unnerving, and it brings up some immediate questions. Not just about your health, but about your wallet. Did that first doctor make a mistake? And more importantly, who ends up paying for it? Okay, to really understand what's going on here, we've got to look at the two key professionals involved. And it's not just about who they are, it's about when they do their jobs. That timing, it's literally everything. So here's the fundamental difference. You've got the treating clinician. That's the doctor or PA you actually see in the exam room. They have to make a judgment call right then and there, based on your symptoms and their quick look at that x-ray. Their job is to treat you now. Then you have the radiologist. This is the specialist whose entire job is to provide the final, expert, official interpretation of that image, and that often happens hours or even a day later. Their job is to confirm, correct, or maybe add more detail to what the first clinician saw. And this timeline, this really shows us where the problem starts. There's this built-in time gap. You get seen, diagnosed, and treated, and a lot of times the clinic submits the insurance claim right away based on that initial gut call. But the official report from the radiologist, the one that might change the diagnosis, well, that often shows up after the bill has already been sent out. That gap is where all the confusion is born. So, with two different medical opinions floating around, how in the world does your insurance company decide if they're going to pay? Well, you might be surprised that it has a lot less to do with who was right in the end, and a lot more to do with one very important principle. When an insurance company gets your claim, they're looking at a bunch of codes for your diagnoses and the treatment you received. Then they check the clinician's notes to see why they decided to do what they did. And then they ask the single most important question of all. Was the treatment reasonable and necessary based on the symptoms and the information the clinician had in that moment? They aren't judging with 20/20 hindsight. And this is the magic phrase that rules everything: medical necessity. See, it's not about whether the diagnosis turned out to be perfectly 100% accurate down the road. It's all about whether the actions taken were appropriate given what the clinician knew and saw when you were sitting right there in front of them. So look, if you only remember one thing from this whole explainer, please make it this. Insurance covers what was medically necessary at the time of the visit. That's it. A different opinion that comes in later from a specialist doesn't just magically erase the medical necessity that existed in that exam room. Okay, so that's the big principle. But let's get real and tackle the two biggest fears that pop up in this situation. One, getting stuck with a giant bill, and two, worrying that your doctor totally messed up. First and foremost, let's just bust this myth right now. A disagreement between the clinician and the radiologist does not automatically get your claim denied. I promise you. Insurance companies see this happen every single day. For them, it's just a normal part of the process. So then, why do claims get denied? Well, it's almost always for boring administrative reasons. The clinic used the wrong billing code, the doctor's notes weren't detailed enough, or there was some other kind of paperwork mix-up. Notice what's not on this list: a medical disagreement. It's almost always about clerical errors that can be fixed. Okay, so that brings us to that second big fear. If the boot wasn't for a real fracture, does that mean the clinician was negligent? Could they get in trouble for a misdiagnosis? Well, the legal system, just like the insurance system, has a very specific way of looking at this. The key legal concept here is something called the standard of care. Now, this is not a standard of perfection. It's a standard of being reasonable. The law just asks a simple question. Given the same situation and the same information, what would another reasonably careful clinician have done? And you know what? Treating a suspected fracture cautiously is almost always considered reasonable. For any situation to be considered actual malpractice, you have to prove three things.
First, that the care was negligent, that it fell below that reasonable standard. Second, that the negligence actually caused harm. And third, that the patient suffered a real injury because of it. In our walking boot scenario, you just don't meet any of those. The care was reasonable, and wearing a boot for a few days for a bad sprain causes no actual harm.
So what is the clinician's real duty here? It's not to be a psychic, it's to follow up. The moment that radiologist's report comes in with new information, the standard of care requires that clinic to call you, explain the new findings, and update your treatment plan. That communication, that follow-up, that is good medicine.
Okay, let's bring all this home and focus on the bottom line. What does this all actually mean for you and your finances?
Let's just walk through it one more time with a super clear example. You go to urgent care, they think it's a fracture, they give you a boot. A few days later, the specialist confirms it was just a really bad sprain. So what's the outcome? Your insurance is almost certainly still going to cover the urgent care visit, the x-ray, and the boot. Why? Because at the moment you were being treated, that was the medically necessary thing to do. So let's just quickly recap the most important takeaways. Number 1, your bill is based on what the diagnosis was during your visit, and a later opinion doesn't cancel that out. Number 2, if you get a denial, it's probably a fixable paperwork error, so always appeal it. And finally, just remember that the whole system is built on a standard of being reasonable, not being perfect. Ultimately, what it all comes down to is this one crucial point. Your care was based on the information that was available at that exact moment in time. And that's what both the insurance companies and the legal system recognize. And that kind of leaves us with one final thought. Now that you know the rules behind the curtain, that it's all about medical necessity at the time, not perfect hindsight, how is that going to change the way you look at and maybe even challenge your next medical bill?